Imagine being 5 years old, standing in a crowded airport, watching your parents walk away. Not because they got lost in the crowd, not because of a misunderstanding, but deliberately, intentionally. They leave you there, small and confused, surrounded by strangers and suitcases, with no explanation and no intention of coming back. Now imagine those same parents returning 30 years later. Not with apologies, not with regret, but with lawyers, demanding money, millions of dollars, money that was left to you by the stranger who saved you that day at baggage claim. This is the story of Melody Hart, and it's about more than abandonment and greed. It's about how the worst betrayal of your life can become the catalyst for the most powerful form of justice. Melody was 5 years old, an age when most children are worried about kindergarten, cartoons, and whether they'll get dessert after dinner. An age of innocence, trust, the unshakable belief that your parents will always protect you. They were at the airport. She remembers the sounds, the overwhelming noise of announcements and rolling suitcases and hundreds of conversations happening at once. The smell of coffee and cleaning products, the bright lights. Everything was big and loud and confusing to a 5-year-old. Her parents told her to wait by the baggage claim. Just wait there. They needed to do something. They'd be right back. She believed them. Why wouldn't she? They were her parents. Parents don't lie about coming back. But they did. She waited and waited. The carousel kept spinning, luggage going round and round. People came and grabbed their bags and left. New people arrived. The carousel emptied and filled again. Hours passed. Or maybe it just felt like hours. Time moves strangely when you're 5 and scared and alone. She started to cry. Not loud, dramatic crying. The quiet kind.
The kind where you're trying to be good, trying not to make a scene, but the fear is leaking out anyway. She kept looking around, scanning every face, hoping to see her mother or father appearing around a corner, apologizing for taking so long. They never came. Airport staff eventually noticed her. A small child, alone, crying quietly by the baggage claim. They approached carefully, the way you approach a frightened animal. Asked her name. Asked where her parents were. She could only say they told her to wait. They'd be right back. Security got involved. Announcements were made over the airport PA system, paging the parents of a lost child, describing what she was wearing, asking them to come to the baggage claim area. Nothing. No response. No frantic parents running through the terminal realizing they'd accidentally left their daughter behind. Because it wasn't an accident. One man stopped and stayed. His name was Robert Winters. He wasn't security or airline staff, just a traveller passing through. But something about this small, frightened child made him pause, made him care when he didn't have to. He sat with her while airport staff tried to figure out what to do, talked to her gently, asked about her favourite things, tried to distract her from the growing realisation that her parents weren't coming back. He bought her a snack from one of the airport shops, a small kindness that probably meant everything to a terrified 5-year-old. Hours turned into a day, then 2 days. The parents never called, never came looking, never contacted the airport or the police to report a missing child. It became clear this wasn't a mix-up or miscommunication. This was abandonment. Robert Winters stayed involved. He couldn't stop thinking about this child, left like forgotten luggage at baggage claim. What kind of parents do that? What circumstances lead to someone deciding their 5-year-old daughter is disposable? Child Protective Services launched an investigation. They tracked down Melody's parents, found them living their lives as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't left a child alone in an airport and simply never come back for her. When questioned, their explanation was chilling in its casualness. They couldn't afford to take care of her anymore. They didn't want the responsibility. So they left her somewhere public, somewhere safe, figuring someone would take care of her. Like she was a puppy they were dropping at a shelter, not their daughter. No remorse, no guilt, just a cold, practical decision that their lives would be easier without her.
They were charged with child abandonment, but the legal system being what it is, the penalties were relatively minor. They claimed poverty, claimed stress, claimed they thought they were doing what was best for her by leaving her somewhere she'd be found and cared for. The court gave them probation, required parenting classes they'd never use since they had no intention of being parents again. Melody went into foster care. The system tried to place her, moving her between homes, looking for the right fit. She was traumatized, understandably. Trust issues, attachment problems, the kind of damage that happens when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally decide you're not worth the effort. But Robert Winters kept checking on her, kept visiting, kept showing up in a way her actual parents never had. He went through the process of becoming a foster parent, passed all the background checks and home visits and interviews, and eventually he adopted her. Robert gave Melody what her biological parents never did: stability, love, and the sense that she mattered. He was older, never married, no children of his own.
By all accounts, he'd led a quiet, private life. But he stepped up for this abandoned child in a way that changed both of their lives. He helped her heal. Therapy, patience, consistency. The daily, small acts that rebuild trust after it's been shattered. Showing up, being present, proving through action that not all adults will abandon you when things get difficult. Melody grew up knowing her origin story. Robert never lied about how they came to be family. She knew about the airport, about being left behind, about her biological parents choosing to walk away. But she also knew about the man who chose to stay. She thrived under his care, did well in school, developed interests and hobbies, built friendships, slowly became less the traumatized, abandoned child, and more a confident young woman with a future. She went to college, then law school. The girl who'd been left at baggage claim grew up to become a lawyer, and eventually a judge. Robert was proud. Immensely proud. He attended every graduation, every achievement, every milestone. He'd saved her in that airport, but she'd also saved him, given his life meaning and purpose he hadn't known he was missing. What Melody didn't know, what Robert never told her, was that he was wealthy. Not just comfortable, not just financially secure, wealthy. He'd made a fortune in business ventures and investments, but he lived modestly. No flashy cars or mansions, no obvious displays of wealth. He valued privacy and simplicity. He'd always intended to leave everything to Melody. She was his daughter in every way that mattered. Blood had nothing to do with family. She deserved security and comfort after the trauma of her childhood. He wanted to make sure she'd never have to worry about money, never have to feel vulnerable or dependent the way she'd been when her parents decided she was too expensive to keep. When Robert passed away, Melody was devastated. She'd lost the man who saved her, who raised her, who showed her what real love looked like. The grief was overwhelming. He'd been her father for 30 years, the only parent who'd ever actually wanted her. At the reading of the will, she discovered the extent of his fortune: $5.5 million. Properties, investments, savings, all of it left to her. She'd had no idea. Robert had lived so simply, so unpretentiously, that his wealth was a complete shock. The money didn't make losing him hurt less, but it was one final act of love. One final way of taking care of her, of making sure she'd be okay even after he was gone. The man who'd stopped at baggage claim all those years ago had given her everything. 6 months after Robert's death, as Melody was still grieving and processing, she received legal papers. A lawsuit. She opened it, confused about who would be suing her and why. The names made her blood run cold. Her biological parents, the people who'd abandoned her 30 years ago, who'd walked away from a 5-year-old at an airport and never looked back, who'd apparently decided that now, after 3 decades of silence, was the perfect time to reconnect. They were suing her for $5.5 million.
The inheritance Robert had left her, money he'd earned through his own work and intelligence, money he'd chosen to give to the daughter he'd raised. They were claiming they had a right to it as her biological parents, that Robert had essentially stolen their child, and the money should return to them as compensation. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't claiming they'd made a mistake, weren't apologizing for abandoning her, weren't asking for a relationship or reconciliation. They wanted money. That was it. That was the only thing that brought them back into her life after 30 years. Melody read through the lawsuit in stunned disbelief.
They'd apparently heard about the inheritance through some mutual connection or news report, and they'd decided, with no shame whatsoever, that they deserved a piece of it. Or all of it, actually. They were suing for the entire amount. The legal argument was weak, transparently greedy, but they'd found lawyers willing to take the case, probably on contingency, hoping for a settlement. They were banking on Melody not wanting to fight, on her wanting to avoid the emotional pain of confronting her abandonment in public court. They were wrong. Here's the twist they didn't see coming. Melody wasn't just a random person they could intimidate with legal papers. She was a judge. She understood the law better than they ever would. She knew exactly how weak their case was, and she knew how to fight back. She couldn't preside over her own case, obviously, conflict of interest. But she knew judges, she knew lawyers, she knew the system inside and out, and she was done being a victim. Her biological parents showed up to court with their lawyers, probably expecting some easy settlement negotiation. Maybe they thought she'd pay them something just to make them go away, to avoid the publicity and pain of having her childhood trauma aired in public. Instead, they walked into a fight. Melody's legal team was exceptional. They'd prepared meticulously. They had documentation of the abandonment, police reports from 30 years ago, court records from the child abandonment charges, statements from airport staff who'd been there that day, records showing that her biological parents had never once tried to contact her, visit her, or be part of her life in any way after leaving her at that airport. They had Robert's will, clear and explicit. All assets to Melody Hart, his legally adopted daughter. No ambiguity, no question about his intentions. He wanted her to have everything. The biological parents had no legal standing whatsoever. But Melody's team went further. They didn't just defend, they attacked. Melody filed a countersuit, claiming emotional distress for the decades of trauma caused by their abandonment, for the therapy bills, for the psychological damage that comes from being left by your parents at 5 years old, for the pain of having them reappear not with apologies, but with demands for money. The countersuit also sought to have them pay her legal fees for defending against their frivolous lawsuit, to make them financially responsible for the cost of their own greed. The trial was brutal. Her biological parents had to sit in court and explain why they'd left a 5-year-old at an airport. They tried to claim poverty, desperation. They tried to paint themselves as victims of circumstances who made a terrible choice they'd regretted ever since. The evidence said otherwise. Records showed they'd moved on with their lives quickly. No attempts to get her back, no letters or calls to check how she was, no child support payments or involvement of any kind. They'd abandoned her and forgotten about her until money entered the picture. Witnesses testified, airport staff who remembered that day, social workers who'd placed Melody in foster care, people who'd worked with Robert and seen his dedication to his adopted daughter, friends of Melody's who'd witnessed her struggles and eventual healing. And Melody herself took the stand. 35 years old, a judge, composed and professional, but with a story that broke hearts in that courtroom. She described waiting at baggage claim, the growing fear as hours passed, the moment she understood they weren't coming back. The years of wondering what she'd done wrong. What was so terrible about her that her own parents couldn't stand to keep her? She described Robert, the stranger who became her father. The man who chose her when her biological parents unchoose her. who gave her everything they never could or would. And she described receiving their lawsuit, the betrayal of having them return not with love or remorse, but with demands. The audacity of people who'd contributed nothing to her life, trying to take everything from her. The judge presiding over the case had an easy decision. The biological parents' lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile, couldn't try again. It was over. They were ordered to pay Melody's legal fees, tens of thousands of dollars for the lawyers they'd forced her to hire to defend against their baseless claim. The money they'd been seeking ended up costing them significantly, and the countersuit for emotional distress was partially successful. While the judge didn't award massive damages, they did award enough to make a point. That you can't abandon a child and then return decades later demanding money without consequences. Her biological parents left the courtroom with nothing. Less than nothing, actually. They'd spent money on lawyers, lost the case, and now owed Melody for her legal defense and emotional distress damages. They tried to appeal. Of course they did. But appeals courts don't often overturn clear decisions about inheritance and parental rights when the facts are this straightforward. The appeal was denied quickly. Melody never heard from them again. The money ran out, and so did their interest in her, which was probably the most predictable outcome imaginable. They'd only returned because they wanted money. When it became clear they'd never get any, they disappeared again. She wasn't surprised. Honestly, she'd have been more shocked if they'd shown genuine remorse or interest in an actual relationship. Their behaviour in court had confirmed everything she'd already known. They were exactly who they'd always been. Selfish, greedy, incapable of seeing her as a person rather than a potential source of money. But the experience changed something in Melody. She'd been a victim as a child, powerless, dependent on the system and the kindness of a stranger. But as an adult, as a judge, she'd been able to fight back, to use the law to protect herself and to make sure her adoptive father's wishes were honoured. She started specialising in family law cases, advocating for children in foster care, presiding over adoption cases, making sure that kids who'd been abandoned or neglected had voices in the legal system, using her position to protect others the way Robert had protected her. The $5.5 million became a tool for good. She donated portions to organisations supporting foster children, set up scholarships for kids ageing out of the system, funded programmes providing therapy for traumatised children. She also established a legal fund, helping people fight frivolous lawsuits from estranged family members trying to claim inheritances they had no right to. Cases similar to hers, people being targeted by relatives who'd abandoned them years ago, but returned when money appeared. Robert's fortune, which her biological parents had tried to steal, became a force for protecting others. Exactly what he would have wanted. He'd saved one abandoned child. Now his money was helping save hundreds more. Melody's story is about many things: abandonment, resilience, the difference between biological family and chosen family, the way trauma can shape you but doesn't have to define you. But it's also about greed and how some people will exploit any connection, however tenuous or damaged, if they think money is involved. Her biological parents didn't see a daughter when they looked at her. They saw $5.5 million. That was the only thing that brought them back. And it's about power. As a 5-year-old, Melody had no power. She was at the mercy of adults who made terrible decisions. She was vulnerable and dependent. But as a judge, she had knowledge, resources, and authority. She could fight back in ways that child never could. The courtroom confrontation wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about closure, about finally having the power to tell her biological parents exactly what their abandonment did to her, to make them face the consequences of their choices in a way they'd never had to before. They'd counted on her being too traumatized or too kind to fight back. They'd made the classic mistake of assuming past victimhood meant current weakness. They didn't know about Robert, didn't know how he'd helped her heal,
didn't know she'd become a judge with a deep understanding of the law and a determination to never be powerless again. Their greed brought them into a battle they couldn't win, and Melody used every tool at her disposal to make sure they lost decisively. Sometimes people ask Melody if she ever wonders what her life would have been like if her biological parents hadn't abandoned her, if they'd kept her, raised her, been actual parents instead of people who left her at baggage claim. She doesn't wonder much, because she knows she would have been raised by people who saw her as a burden, who made decisions based on convenience rather than love, who could walk away from a 5-year-old without looking back. Robert gave her something they never could: unconditional love, security, the knowledge that she mattered, that she was wanted, that someone chose her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The abandonment was traumatic, devastating. It shaped her life in ways both obvious and subtle. But it also led her to Robert, to a father who was present, supportive, loving in ways her biological parents never could have been.
And when they returned 30 years later, trying to claim money they had no right to, she was ready. Not as that 5-year-old child, frightened and alone at baggage claim, but as a woman who'd survived, thrived, and become someone with the knowledge and power to protect what was hers. They walked into her courtroom thinking they'd found easy money. Instead, they found justice. The kind of justice that says you don't get to abandon someone and then benefit from their success. That blood doesn't entitle you to anything if you've never actually been family. That the person you left behind might grow up to be someone who can fight back. Melody Hart was abandoned at 5, left like luggage at an airport by people who should have protected her. But she was saved by a stranger who became her real father, who gave her love, stability, and a $5.5 million inheritance that represented 30 years of care. And when her biological parents tried to take that from her, she did what any good judge would do. She presided over their defeat. She made sure justice was served. She protected not just herself, but others who might face similar exploitation. The girl left at baggage claim grew up to be a woman who never loses, because she learned from the best, from a man who stopped when he didn't have to, who cared when it wasn't required, who showed her that family is about choice and commitment, not just biology. Robert Winters saved Melody Hart that day at the airport. But in many ways, she saved him too, gave his life purpose, made him a father when he'd never been one before, created a legacy that continues long after his death. And that legacy? It's everything her biological parents will never have. Love, respect, gratitude, and a daughter who honors their memory by helping others. That's the ultimate revenge. Not defeating them in court, though that was satisfying, but living well. Becoming someone they could never diminish, using what Robert gave her to make the world better. The 5-year-old at baggage claim grew up to be a judge, and when her past came for her fortune, she was ready. Ready to fight, ready to win, ready to make sure that the man who saved her was honored and protected, even after death. Justice served. Case closed.